So this is a way to make an eyeball in Maya using just Maya nodes and no bitmaps. This is the end result here. If we turn around, we can just see it from different sides. And this is what we're going to do in the hypershade that I've got open here. So let me stop this and just look at the scene for a second. I've got two lights out there, just a couple of big area lights, and there's a few place 3D nodes that are part of the shader. Also, as far as the geometry goes, I've got two spheres. This inner one is the eye color, and the outer one is the reflection. So I'm going to hide this one for now and just work on this one, because this is what I'm primarily interested in here. So I'll close this. And let's look at the hypershade a little more. It looks like a lot of nodes, but I've tried to organize it to make it less complicated. Almost everything is going into this first ramp, this main ramp here. So what I'm going to do is make this one from scratch, and we can just take a look. And I'm going to make so I'm tabbing, I'm going to make a ramp texture. I've got it mapped in the existing one to the subsurface color and the base color. And I'm using a little bit of both. As I work on it though, I'm just going to turn the subsurface off and make it all base. So just like a standard color here. So I'm going to map this new ramp to the base color, and let's just see what it does. Actually, I'll disconnect all the bumps and just take a look at this here. All the V ramps here essentially are going to work so that the right end of the ramp is the pupil, and the left side is at the back of the eye. And I'm basically going to use this the whole way to make a shader. I'm going to make the ramp a little bigger. And at least just for now, throw in a middle color. Oops. And make the pupil black. Essentially something like this. This is going to be my eye. So instead of the blue, we're going to have to use something more complicated. And instead of the white, we're going to use something more complicated. So I think I'll start with the white area. Let me close this. So I'm going to work from the one that I already have built here. The one I just made's got two blue in here. This one has these two that are the eye color. And this last one, it's got a connection, and I'm going to follow it off here to here. So I've got a small network of nodes here that I've duplicated 2 more times. There it is again, and there it is again. So let's look at what these are. What it is a Maya marble. Let me just use this into our existing blue and white ramp. So I'm going to middle mouse drag and drop this marble. Let me grab the white color first, get it selected, then middle mouse drag the the marble onto there. And I'll show you what I've done to the marble, and everything else really is just a copy of that. So I'll delete the incoming connections at the moment. Actually, this is the contrast, just so I don't forget. And this is the filler color. So this is, at this point, pretty much a default Maya marble. I've adjusted some of the amplitude settings and the ratio settings, and you can change these and see what happens. And what this is called the small veins one. And I'm using a thickness ramp. And this is just a plain old ramp. To control the thickness of the veins. This value right here. So you can make them really thick. You can make them really thin. I'm just going to middle mouse drag and drop on here. And then you'll see that I can make them thin or 0 up close to the top, and then have them gradually get thicker at the back, which is kind of what we have here. And you can adjust the middle part here. I usually do it this way, just add a new color in here and thin it down a little bit. So even though it's really thin, I'm still seeing some of this other stuff here, some other red values, and that's really the diffusion. If I turn that totally off for now, I can see just the thickness. So I can increase the thickness by making this brighter. And one thing I sort of like with all these ramps, I can add noise in here. And I'm going to add value noise. And this will help vary it a little bit. So it looks pretty splotchy when I do that now. But as I increase the value noise frequency, you can see that travel right through it. It just helps give some variety to the thickness. So I've got one already done. I've got a thickness ramp here that I'll just plug back in. Actually, I just let me make it easier. I'll middle mouse drag and drop onto thickness. And get rid of this temporary one that I made. As you can see from this, I'm also mapping the diffusion. So you can look at the diffusion here. You can see what happens if I turn it up all the way. So I don't really like up all the way. You get all these squiggles everywhere. So I did put a ramp in on this as well. And actually, when I see this, I'd probably like to add a little bit of noise to this as well. And I can increase the frequency of that noise. I've got one more ramp sitting out here. So what happens is once I add noise to something, it starts messing up the pupil. This right here and this right here. I get some values from the white of the eye into the iris and into the pupil that I don't want. And so I use this and I'm mapping it into the color offset and the alpha gain. That way I can do either to help fix that. So I might do it here as well. So middle mouse drag and drop to the color offset. Whoops, I'm sorry. To the color gain. Color gain. Let's get this right here. Map it to the color gain, not the offset, and to the alpha gain. And that'll just keep this from going into the iris. That's all this is right here. So you can see what will happen if I pull this back. I can just pretty much erase the whole thing. And that's all I'm doing there. So one other thing I did was I mapped the contrast here. And let's take a look at the contrast. If I turn it all the way down, I get a lot more diffusion. If I turn it all the way up, you get none. This was a way to just use this existing ramp, reverse it, black to white, and use this for the contrast. So what this is doing, this gives me a way to adjust the gamma. Okay. And so that's what I'm using for the small veins. This right here. On each one of these marble textures, there's a place 3D node. And this is just a way to scale or rotate the veins around to get something that you like. Scale being the most, will make the most difference. So you want to get the scale right based on the size of your eyes. So I took this whole thing. If I select the veins, find a little empty spot on my space here, and duplicate this shading network, it makes another copy of these veins for me, all rigged up and ready to go. So let me delete that. And that's what I have up here, another copy. And so what I was doing is taking this copy and mapping it into the filler color of the first veins that I did. So instead of using just this whitish pink, I'm going to drag in another copy of the veins. And this gives me more small veins. I found it easier just to make a copy and just kind of layer them together this way. So I changed the rotations a little bit, changed the ramps a little bit, just make something different. And then made another copy of the veins right here. So one thing I did here, actually I should probably disconnect this so we could see it separately. This is both small veins. I made one with larger veins that I mapped into the filler color. And this one, I think you can kind of see that the thickness is definitely thicker. And I scaled it so I would have less of them. But they would be thicker. So I just wanted some way to have bunches of small veins and thicker veins that I could control. And the last part of this, large veins here, instead of having white as the background, let me break the connection and see this is what I've got. Somewhere up here. I just put a gradation, just put another ramp into the background. And that was really, that's what the veins are. It's just multiple nested Maya marbles. And you don't need all these ramps to do it. I think you probably need thickness and diffusion. You could ramp other things too. I think one thing to be kind of interesting is ratio could get ramped. This would all be interesting to do. So let's look at this part right here. So where's my little test ramp here? This is what's on here now. And I've just got blue here in 2 spots. So really, instead of just using a solid blue, I basically made a collection of things, collection of layers with 5 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are just some masks. And I use all of these to make the eye color. So instead of using solid blue, I use this. So what I could do here is wherever I've got solid blue, I'm going to map in these layers. So I'm middle mouse drag and drop these layers in. So the real question becomes, what are all these layers? So I'm using an AI layer RGB, and you build layers from the bottom, or layer 1, and everything else goes on top. And I'm going to turn these off and show them to you one at a time. So this is the first layer, and it's essentially just a ramp, and I've just picked an eye color, this blue. I've added a little bit of noise, hue, saturation, and value. And one thing I have done is this is a U ramp. So instead of going from the front of the pupil to the back of the eye, it wraps around the eye. And I've repeated it a number of times in the U direction. So you can see what happens if this is the default way it comes out. But if I repeat it once and twice, 3, 4, 5. This is the first layer, or the bottommost layer in this RGBA. I'm going to turn on the second one. And this is just a fractal, a Maya fractal. It looks like I've got a little bit of color to it, but maybe that's just this monitor. You can adjust the frequency on it just to suit. So this is connected in right here, and it's set to multiply. And it's also got a mix slider here. This is where you can mask it. And if I can turn it off, if I don't like it, if it's too heavy, something like that. The next layer is this brightness ramp. And this is just some very bright colors close to the center here. I could probably add a little bit of noise to this, but let's see what happens when I add this. So this is layer 3, and I'll turn it on. And it looks like it's only affecting the center here. It doesn't seem to reach all the way to the edge. That's because this mix layer, I've mapped in a ramp. I think this is the right ramp. Ramp 5. And you can see what happens if I adjust this. This controls where you see this layer. So I got this ramp here. I chose reflect as my layer blending mode, and by all means try all of them. And I think I might go back here actually, and what if I do add a little bit of hue noise? What happens here? I can turn it way up. Yep, adjust that to your heart's content. So the next 2 layers are variations on the same thing. They're both simplex noises with a color correct. And let me show you what the simplex noises do, what I'm doing in this case with these. And just so we can see it, I'm going to do them both up here. There's a simplex noise, and just so we can see it over here, I'll put it into the material. And so there's the noise, and it's just another Maya noise, except that it's got different types here. And I'm going to use the cellular type, and we get this kind of thing right here. One of the neat things about these noises, I'm going to hide this, is that you can daisy chain them. So if I make another one, and I'll hide this for now, I'm going to take this second noise and pipe it into the distortion on the first one. So I don't really see any distortion. I see it mapped in here. So I've got to turn up the ratio to even see the distortion. And as I start turning it up, you can see some of the patterns you've got. And essentially that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make an interesting pattern here that looks vaguely eye-like. So I'm going to delete those. Put this ramp that I'm building back on. So these are my layers. I've got two simplex noises, daisy chain, just like I showed you there. I'm putting it into a color correct so I can make some adjustments. And then putting onto my layer here. Just to make it, I think, easier to understand, I'm going to look at the last one first. So not layer 4, but layer 5. Yeah. Okay. So layer 5 is this last group here. A little hard to see. I could probably increase the brightness or exposure a little bit just so you can see what it is. That's a little crazy. This is also masked off. Yeah, you can just see it start to change as I adjust this. So I don't want it to be too strong. In the color correct, I'm essentially turning it cyan, changing the exposure and the contrast and a number of other things, to tweak it out. And instead of turning it just pure cyan, I pipe the ramp into that. So I've got cyan, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of noise on that as well. So layer 4 in here that I haven't turned on is pretty much the same thing, except that I'm using this to darken underneath layer 5. So I turn 5 off for a moment. It's got a different layer mode. I adjusted the noise pattern so it's not exactly the same. And it's set to multiply, so you can see the difference it makes. And then the brightening layer on layer 5. So that looks like I've made it a little crazier since making the adjustments here. So those are the layers that went into this iris. The last thing I did is on this base ramp that it's all connected to. So this is the iris here. I'm going to add a solid color right here in between the white of the eye and the iris. So right now it's kind of a red. And I'm just going to grab something from here. It might be a little dark. Something like that. And this is nice because it looks a little more realistic, and you can adjust the amount of fall off you want. So last thing I think on this that you're going to need is you need some kind of bump. It'll give you the creep factor with the veins pumping out a little bit. And so what I did is I took this from the first marble. This has all the other ones piped into it, but I'm going to use that first marble. And I'm going to put it into a bump 2D. typically use a bump 3D with marble, but for some reason I can only sporadically get that to work with this. And this is something I don't quite understand. So to get this to work, I take that marble and put it into AI color convert. And this is just something to change it so that I can get it to work with the bump map. And I changed it from HSV to RGB into the bump. I've got it set pretty low here. And you'll start getting some of that. So you kind of wonder what this is probably. If I put this in directly, I'm using the green channel. Some of the veins start creeping into the iris, and you can see the bump in the iris. So that was a problem. So I made another layer RGB where I would put this at the bottom, or layer 1. Put another ramp on top of it, set to multiply, so that it would just multiply by 0 everything in the iris area. And then I could use that as a bump. And that's all the connections. The eye I showed you at the beginning had subsurface scattering on it. So what I've done is taking the ramp, I've got it into the base color, and I also just middle mouse drag it or connect it to the subsurface color. And then end up trying to balance these a little bit. And you can see you're going to get a much more realistic look with this. And there's lots of stuff to adjust. So let me pause for a second and let's let this render. So as I let this render, I realized there was something I left off. When I'm adding the other circle around the outside, it helped on this base to add the coat for the shininess here. You can see what happens when I turn it up. And when I do that, I lose some of the detail on the bump that happens here. And the coat has its own section for bump right here. So what you can do is drag and drop the bump 2D that you used for going into the normal camera. Just drag and drop it onto here. And you get a little extra out of it. And then we look pretty good. I really think that's the end of it here. Let's let it render. Okay. I think we're looking pretty good. The veins are definitely creepy, sticking out a little bit. We got the shine, we got the inside. So thanks.